Cape Verde is like a hurricane factory. Many are spawned from there. Hurricane Irma was an example of this. It went on to be an extremely powerful hurricane that caused widespread destruction during its life in the 2017 season, particularly in the northeastern Caribbean and Florida Keys. Hi, I'm Chris May, writer, producer, and host of This Day in Weather History, now in its second year from the Weather Network in Canada. September 5th, the day a hurricane already named Irma hit the history books as a Cat 5 storm. Yes, it reached that status on this day in weather history. On this podcast, we have already talked about the 1935 Labor Day hurricane and other similar powerful storms named Katrina, Dorian, Harvey, Wilma, and just yesterday, Felix. Today is another name in the pantheon of storms, so rare they will be remembered forever. Today is the day Hurricane Irma reached Category 5 strength. Starting with the letter I, Irma was, therefore, the 9th named storm, 4th hurricane, 2nd major hurricane, and 1st Category 5 hurricane of that 2017 season. That would not last long, though, as Hurricane Maria would follow 2 weeks later. Yeah, that in itself is an unusual occurrence. As a result, Irma would then also go on to be the first of the 2 Category 5 hurricanes that would strike the Leeward Islands. However, at that moment in time, it was considered to have been the most powerful hurricane on record in the open Atlantic region outside of the Caribbean Sea and Gulf of Mexico until it was surpassed by Hurricane Dorian just 2 years later. And that fact was outlined in detail on the September 1st episode of this podcast. Another reason why off the top I mentioned that Irma remains in the same conversation as other legends like Wilma, Harvey, Dorian, and Katrina. It was also the most intense hurricane to strike the continental United States since Hurricane Katrina in 2005. The first major hurricane to make landfall in Florida since Wilma in the same year, and the first Category 4 hurricane to strike the state since Charley did it in 2004. Lasting from its naming as a tropical storm on August 31st until its post-tropical downgrade on September 11th, Hurricane Irma spanned 650 miles from east to west, had a direct effect on at least 9 continental United States, where it turned streets into rivers, ripped down power lines, leaving millions without power. It uprooted trees while also severing routes in and out of coastal communities. Welcome to year 2 of this podcast. Right now, you're listening to the full version of today's story on your favorite podcast provider, but there's also the daily podcast video short. They're shot right here in my podcast recording studio, so you get that perspective, but oftentimes they will include visuals from that day's event from when it happened in weather history. So after listening to the full story, go check out the podcast video short on television or online anytime at theweathernetwork.com/weather history. After reaching Category 5 status on September 5th, this day in weather history, the next day, September 6th, Hurricane Irma left a string of small Caribbean islands completely devastated. The actual eye of the storm passed over Barbuda, wrecking close to 95% of the buildings on that small Caribbean island. The hurricane then continued north and west until it hit southwest Florida on September 10th, battering the southern half of the state. What many forget is that a common effect embedded within the outer bands of a tropical storm, let alone a hurricane, are powerful thunderstorms. But these thunderstorms are moisture and humidity infused, so there's an insane amount of energy with these, and that will lead to tornadoes. And Irma lived up to this expectation big time, leaving a trail of tornadoes in its wake, along with flooding storm surge. Irma's core moved slowly inland, triggering the evacuation orders for over 5.5 million people. Then, the next day, September 11th, while the rest of the country remembered and reflected upon the terrifying events that unfolded 6 years earlier in Manhattan, at the Pentagon, and in a field in Pennsylvania, Irma mercifully weakened and was downgraded to a tropical storm as it limped through Georgia on its way deeper into the heart of the country. It was finally over. Irma had done its worst, and the cleanup was on. But on September 5th of this 2017 hurricane season, Irma had reached that critical Category 5 strength status on this day in weather history. Tomorrow is September 6th. And on this day in weather history, we're going all the way back to the year 1666. It already sounds ominous. That was the Great London Fire. What started in a bakery, this fire spread and ripped through the big city. That once was the hub of the Roman Empire. All of its destruction I will outline in detail tomorrow, September 6th, this day in weather history, with me, your host, Chris May.